We're living in a pretty great time for Warhammer 40k fans, especially for those who don't only play the tabletop or read. On PC, there's going to be a new experience which is not much talked about. Alongside Dawn of War 4, there's now a new game coming, Total War Warhammer 40k. Yes, you heard it right. After the huge success of Total War Warhammer Fantasy series, Creative Assembly is now apparently taking on the grim sci-fi universe of Warhammer 40k. And if you think about it even a second, it sounds like a truly Herculean task. Total War is known for massive armies, enormous battles, strategic campaigns, and plenty of chaos on the battlefield. Warhammer 40k is known for even bigger armies, even more colossal battles, deadly Xenos, sinister demons, chaos gods, armored tank columns, and planets. In other words, this could either become one of the most exciting strategy games of the coming years, or one of the biggest challenges Creative Assembly has ever taken on. And that's exactly why we're going to take a look at everything that is currently known about Total War Warhammer 40k. We'll cover the release, platforms, factions, campaign, gameplay, battlefield, exterminators, and of course the big question, can Total War even work when bolters, tanks, and orbital bombardments take center stage instead of swords, spears, and cavalry? One particular exciting piece of news is right from the start. Total War Warhammer 40k is reportedly planned not only for PC, but also for consoles. That would be a major step for this series, since Total War has traditionally only been on PC. Creative Assembly apparently isn't just trying to make another Total War installment. They're aiming to create something much bigger, and that becomes clear when you look at the gameplay. After all, Warhammer 40k isn't a setting where two armies politely line up in formation and slowly march toward each other. This isn't the Middle Ages. In the 34th millennium, people shoot. A lot. This is a world of bolters, blaster weapons, heavy tanks, artillery, and so on. Creative Assembly will therefore have to significantly rework the familiar Total War formula. Simply placing a few Space Marines into additional formations wouldn't be enough. The game needs to feel different, more modern, more brutal, more mobile, and more 40k. If the developers can pull off this balancing act, Total War Warhammer 40k could become exciting. Let's move on to the factions though. At launch, Creative Assembly is reportedly focusing on 4 major factions: Space Marines, Orcs, Eldari, and the Astra Militarum. Let's start with the Space Marines. The Space Marines are probably the most iconic warriors of the Imperium. Genetically enhanced, heavily armored, fanatically loyal, and incredibly dangerous on the battlefield. In a strategy game like Total War, they likely won't rely on sheer numbers, but on quality. Fewer units, but each one exceptionally powerful, durable, and versatile. What's particularly interesting is that Creative Assembly apparently isn't focusing solely on the biggest, most famous heroes. Instead of ultimately putting players in control of a Primarch like Robotus Gulliman or Lionel Johnson, players will reportedly be able to create and customize their own Space Marine captain. This customization is expected to include equipment and most likely the captain's chapter affiliation as well. For fans, that's naturally a very appealing idea. Anyone familiar with 40k from the tabletop hobby knows that creating your own chapters, choosing your own color schemes, designing your own commanders, and inventing their own backstories is a huge part of what makes the hobby so enjoyable. And this is where another feature comes into play: the Army Painter. But we'll get into that in just a moment. The second faction is the Orcs. With the Orcs, you pretty much know exactly what you're getting: loud, brutal, chaotic, completely over the top, and they want one thing: war. Unlike the Space Marines, the Orcs will likely rely on overwhelming numbers, speed, chaos, and raw brute force. Expect huge armies, relentless pressure, ramshackle war machines, and probably plenty of glorious, ridiculous moments on the battlefield. If Creative Assembly gets the Orcs right, they could quickly become one of the most entertaining factions in the game. But next we have the Eldari. The Eldari are essentially the space elves of Warhammer 40k. They are ancient, technologically advanced, elegant, deadly, and deeply tragic. Once one of the galaxy's greatest civilizations, they now stand off the brink of extinction. And that's exactly what could make them especially interesting for gameplay. The Eldari aren't a faction that throws endless hordes into battle. Instead, they rely on speed, precision, mobility, advanced technology, and psychic abilities. It's easy to imagine them playing very differently from the Space Marines, Orcs, and Astra Militarium. The developers have hinted that Eldari will play significantly different from anything the studio has created before. That sounds promising, but also an ambitious goal. Because factions like these ultimately reveal how bold a game's design really is. Will the Eldari truly feel unique? Or will the Eldari truly feel unique? Or will they end up being a little more than fast range units with a special few abilities? The fourth faction is Astra Militarum. This faction is essentially the true military backbone of the Imperium. The Space Marines may be the franchise poster boys, but it's the ordinary men and women of the Astra Militarium who fight the vast majority of the Imperium's wars. With countless soldiers, heavy tanks, artillery, chains of command, and a life expectancy that's probably best not to think about for too long. For gameplay perspective, the Astra Militarum could serve as a counterpart to the Orcs. Both factions rely on overwhelming numbers, but in completely different ways. The Orcs charge in with noise, chaos, and ramshackle machinery, while the Astra Militarium fights with discipline, organized firing lines, tanks, artillery, and a well-defended command structure. Let's take a look at the campaign setting. Total War Warhammer 40k takes place during the Era Indomitus, one of the most turbulent periods of the Warhammer 40k universe. For a Total War game, it's almost the perfect setting. The galaxy is on fire. Every faction is pursuing its own agenda, entire star systems have become war zones, and every faction is nothing more than a brief moment of success. Creative Assembly describes the campaign as being built around a so-called crusade theater. There are large-scale war zones in which players gradually fight their way from planet to planet. So rather than representing the entire galaxy as one gigantic campaign, the game will apparently feature large sectors or military campaigns that may be interconnected. In Total War Warhammer 40k, units will apparently be able to take cover and occupy buildings. That makes the game feel more like a classic real-time strategy title, such as Dawn of War, than a traditional Total War battle. On top of that, the environment itself will be destructible. Buildings, forests, and other terrain features can all be destroyed. This isn't just visually spectacular, but it also has This isn't just visually appealing, it also has significant gameplay implications. And yes, orbital bombardments have been confirmed. You're not just fighting over a wall, a gate, or a hill. You simply call the fleet in orbit and vaporize everything. Things become even more extreme with Exterminators. For Warhammer 40k fans, that's one of the setting's most iconic concepts. Exterminators means the complete destruction of an entire planet, because from the Imperium's perspective, there's nothing left worth saving. Creative Assembly has already suggested, however, that this won't be a button players can press whenever they feel like it. If Creative Assembly succeeds, this could become not only a great Warhammer game, but perhaps one of the most important strategy games of the next few years. There are still many unanswered questions. We don't have a firm release date, we don't know exactly how the campaign will work, which factions will be added later, or how the game will ultimately play. But everything that's been shown and discussed so far sounds like a bold step forward. It sounds like a game that understands one fundamental truth. Warhammer 40k was never meant to be small in scale. Now, Creative Assembly simply has to prove that its grand vision also works in gameplay. Until then, that's all that's left to say. The war of the 41st millennium is coming to Total War. Cheers.